Coming up, witness the energy and patriotism emanating from thousands of conservative youth, a component of the population that the mainstream media would have you believe doesn't exist, and you will be instantly reassured. Welcome back to Political Spirits. I'm your host, Franklin Rye. We still stand for the proposition that the left and the right should have a few drinks and talk. Compromise is not a requirement. If those discussions result in us changing or even abandoning our positions, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine too. We just need to talk to each other. In that way, we can unify through speech. And if the discussion becomes a bit heated, at the end of the night, we should still be able to split up the bar tab and be on our way. So what are we going to talk about this week? Well, the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that I attended a Turning Point USA Student Action Summit this week. It was massive and apparently included somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 attendees. If you've listened to my podcast before, you know that I'm not of high school or college student age. A limited number of adults were allowed to pay an adult price to attend the summit, and I was one of them. Trust me, it was well worth it. The speaker lineup was amazing and included not only Turning Point founder Charlie Kirk, of course, but also Donald Trump Jr., Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck, Laura Ingraham, Rudy Giuliani, Sebastian Gorka, Candace Owens, Congressman Dan Crenshaw, Dave Rubin, Rich Lowry, James O'Keefe, Ken Starr, Greg Jarrett, Eric Bolling, Dinesh D'Souza, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Andy Ngo, Michael Knowles, and many others. But that's not all. On Saturday, the ultimate speaker appeared. President Donald Trump himself spoke to the audience consisting primarily of college and high school students, but also including me, for over an hour and a half, and as always, he was great and the crowd was electrified. If you ever think we're doomed to socialism, to an abandonment of free speech, to loss of the freedom recognized by the Second Amendment, to abandonment forced by the left of the simple, logical, self-evident truths we used to recognize, just attend a Turning Point function. Witness the energy and patriotism emanating from thousands of conservative youth, a component of the population that the mainstream media would have you believe doesn't exist, and you'll be instantly reassured. Recognize that the Turning Point membership is just the tip of the spear. The youth who are willing to step forward and proclaim their conservative beliefs. Recognize that the reality is that there's a silent mass of conservative youth one step removed from Turning Point membership, existing in relative silence in the face of being ostracized by the authoritarian left within student bodies, professorships, and educational administrators, which throttles much of free speech in the educational institutions of America. Those huge numbers of silent young conservatives represent the protection of the future of America, and Turning Point USA is an organization which may succeed in bringing those silent conservatives into the open to maximize their impact. Just a few observations from the conference. Every time I attend a conservative political function, I'm reminded of just how ridiculous are the characterizations of the right which are peddled by the political left and much of the media. Listen to Democrat members of Congress claim that conservatives are racist, and then contrast that with the response from the Turning Point attendees when the reduction of the unemployment rate is announced. Regardless of whether that announcement comes from a conservative commentator such as Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, or Candace Owens, or it comes from President Trump himself, you'll find that the crowd applauds more enthusiastically at the announcement that the unemployment rate has been reduced for African Americans and Hispanic Americans than they applaud for the announcement of the reduction of the unemployment rate in general. And they don't do that in response to an applause sign or applause cards or some sort of direction. They do it spontaneously. How do you square that with the contention that conservatives are racist? Think about the ridiculous claims from members of Congress and some members of the media that conservatives are anti-Semitic. Now contrast that with the actual behavior of the crowd at the Turning Point function. When a speaker mentions the state of Israel, he or she gets spontaneous, rousing applause. When President Trump mentions the order that he signed prohibiting anti-Semitic discrimination on college campuses, the crowd absolutely erupted with applause and screams of support. Once again, try to square that response with the absurd claims from the left that conservatives are anti-Semitic. You can't. They're ridiculous. Call me overly optimistic, but I'm beginning to think that more and more of the public is catching on to the BS coming from the left, and organizations like Turning Point USA help to make sure that happens sooner rather than later. So what did I think of President Trump's speech? Well, the first thing I'm going to say is something that you've probably all picked up on by watching the president on TV during his rallies. His energy level is amazing. I'm certainly nowhere near as old as President Trump, but I don't have nearly the energy that he exhibits during his speeches. It's amazing, and it's clear that he loves giving them. We've all seen his performances on television, but seeing him in person gives me even more perspective. And the perspective it gives to me is it reveals just how false the claims of the media have been when they speculate about him having health issues or claim that he's losing it mentally. Watch him perform on stage in person, and you realize that those claims are every bit as ridiculous as the claims that conservatives are racist or anti-Semitic. President Trump is as sharp as he was at the start of his presidency, and he continues to be able to command the crowd. If you want to see a politician who's lost his edge with age, you look to Joe Biden. You don't look to Donald Trump. Next topic. Three reasons why the Democrats are doomed in 2020. It's time to get into the specifics, the reasons why the Democrats will lose horribly in 2020, the reasons why they're doomed on Election Day, and there are three of them. The first big issue is one that I've touched on many times before. The economy is just too strong. Even at the recent Democratic debates, the clearly left-of-center moderators brought up the issue. And with nothing to back him up, Joe Biden claimed the economy wasn't strong. Good luck with that, Joe. Unemployment remains near historic lows. African American unemployment is at an historic low. Ditto for Hispanic unemployment. Labor force participation rates have continued to improve. And the labor force participation rate for women is the highest it's been in more than 17 years. Wage rates continue to climb, and as has been noted with multiple prior releases of economic data from the Trump administration, the portion of the workforce which is incurring the largest increases in wage rates is the blue-collar sector, the core of his base. Good luck running against that, Democrats. It simply isn't going to happen. There's no way that the Democrats are going to be able to convince the electorate that this is a bad economy. Some sort of significant economic collapse would have to happen, and with each passing month it looks less and less likely that it will. Could it? Of course. But how would you like to be the party that has to sit back and wait for economic collapse to be able to win? That was the first reason why the Democrats are doomed in 2020. So where does the strength of the economy leave the Democrats? It leaves them pretending that the economy is weak, to the point that even the liberal commentators push back and looking for something else to run on rather than the traditional economic issues. So how many times has a Democrat friend or acquaintance said to you that the 2020 election is going to be a referendum on Donald Trump? That his behavior, that the things he says are so over the top, unacceptable, less than presidential, even reprehensible, that the electorate will throw him out of office. It's couched as if it's a sign of the strength of the Democrat position. But it isn't. It isn't a sign of strength. Instead, it shows that the Democrats don't have the typical economic issues to rely on. Think about the minority base of the Democratic Party. There have been lots of times over the years where the economy seems to be turning around or growing steadily, but segments of the economy to which minority groups are particularly involved may lag behind. As a result, there have been periods where a Democratic candidate could talk about painfully high African American unemployment, even when unemployment rates as a whole might be trending down. That isn't the Trump economy. As I noted, and President Trump has noted a nearly endless number of times, African American unemployment rates have been at historic lows under his presidency. The Democrats' typical argument has been cut off. Not only that, but as I've noted in prior episodes, President Trump has been engaging in outreach to the black community. The Democrats have to be terrified. So what do? They couch the election as being a referendum on President Trump, on his demeanor, behavior, and the things he says. That isn't a strength. Think about it. You're an African American father watching your wages rise or realizing that you have multiple jobs to choose from if you want to switch to another company. And the Democrats are effectively saying to you, well, yeah, I know you got a pay raise and the job opportunities in your line of work are really good, but have you noticed how mean the president is? He says the Speaker of the House is crazy in his tweets. Think about how unpresidential that is. What do you think that African American father is saying to himself? I think he's saying, are you kidding me? I've got a paycheck that's higher than it's been in years. I have reliable employment. I have multiple options in the job market. And you want me to vote for the Democrat because President Trump sends rude tweets? How about this? I vote for the president who's good for my bottom line, who helps me put food on the table for my family with a good economy. And Nancy Pelosi can go get some counseling if she's offended by rude tweets. I think there are going to be a lot of African American fathers with exactly those thoughts running through their heads. And the numbers don't even have to get that big before the Democrats run into very serious election troubles. So what about independents? What about suburban independents? Perhaps they'll be a bit less sensitive to the pure economic evaluation and a little more sensitive to the argument that President Trump isn't presidential. Okay. Well, think about the way the target you're referring to as rude needs to be perceived for you to make your case. He has to be unsympathetic. If you're basically portraying him as a jerk, he doesn't just need to be saying things that are rude. He needs to be conducting himself in a way that it doesn't promote sympathy for himself, and his opponents need to be conducting themselves in a way that doesn't promote sympathy for him. So what did the Democrats just do? They impeached him. And they impeached him for conduct that doesn't constitute a crime. They impeached him because he pushed for an investigation of what looks like corruption. And they and their enablers in the media operated based on the unspoken assumption that pushing a foreign country to investigate apparent corruption by your opponent necessarily means that you insisted upon a rigged investigation, not a legitimate investigation. That you insisted upon a particular predetermined result that your opponent committed a crime. But the Democrats never showed any evidence that the president insisted on an investigation with a predetermined result. And then, after insisting that it was urgent that the impeachment be conducted at a record pace because of the threat that the president represented to the country, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, has deliberately delayed sending the articles of impeachment to the Senate for trial. And she said she's holding them as leverage to force the Senate to conduct the kind of trial she wants. Clearly, her conduct makes this impeachment seem even more like a purely political exercise, not like anything which is in any way seeking justice. And now add to that the manifestly unjust way in which the impeachment inquiry was conducted, initially with secret testimony, with the most favorable characterizations provided to the press by Democrat leakers. At the same time, Republican committee members were threatened with ethics investigations if they leaked, followed by public hearings with the witnesses tightly controlled by the Democrat chairman. It all looked like a kangaroo court. Now think about the impression that leaves with independent voters. Voters who aren't loyal to either Republicans or Democrats. that kangaroo court perception may not sink in with Democrats, and it almost certainly won't sink in with Democrats who are diehard Trump haters, but that isn't the case with independents. They see it. They see what happened. And Nancy Pelosi's conduct in holding onto the articles as leverage makes it even more obvious. So what does that impression of unfairness accomplish? It makes Donald Trump a sympathetic character. Let me say it again. The conduct of the House Democrats in conducting this impeachment based on the threadbare justification contained in their articles of impeachment, the incredibly biased and unjust way in which they conducted the investigation, and the political game playing in holding the articles back from the Senate to try to alter the way the Senate conducts the trial, have made President Donald Trump a sympathetic character. The House Democrats have managed to make the most powerful person in the world, with a reputation for cutthroat negotiation, a propensity for boastfulness in the extreme, and a multi-billion-dollar fortune, a sympathetic character. And they did this at a time when they're trying to run against him using the approach that the election is a referendum on Donald Trump, on his conduct, on his tweets, on his rudeness. At a time when the absolute last thing that the Democrat leadership should ever want to do, if they expect to have any chance of winning, is to make Donald Trump a sympathetic character, they engage the entire Democratic congressional leadership in a full-on, no-holds-barred, 24/7 news cycle, turn it up to 11 campaign to turn Donald Trump into a sympathetic character. I'm laughing my butt off. But if I were a Democrat, if I opposed Donald Trump, I'd be crying. That was just the second reason why the Democrats are doomed in 2020. So what's the third reason? Well, who do they have? What stellar campaigner, what superstar politician did they have to put up against a charismatic president who succeeded to an almost unprecedented extent in fulfilling his campaign promises, and who can rightfully campaign on a stout economy with record-setting low unemployment? Well, they have a 77-year-old former vice president who unsuccessfully ran for president twice before, and who's showing concerning signs of his advanced age, to say the least. Not only does he mumble repeatedly, but some of what he says actually doesn't make any sense. And the longer he goes on in a debate, the more his performance fades. It legitimately looks like Joe Biden doesn't have the stamina for the presidency, and perhaps not for this presidential campaign. And that contrasts with the amazing energy of President Trump, who seems to be capable of performing for hours on end at campaign events. But that's not the only problem with Joe Biden. He's at the center of the impeachment. Sure, the Democrats did everything they could to prevent the conduct of Joe Biden and his son Hunter from being front and center in the impeachment inquiry. For example, they refused to allow Hunter Biden to be called as a witness. But make no mistake about it. The fact that Biden forced Ukraine to fire the prosecutor who has testified in court that he was investigating the company which was paying Biden's underqualified son exorbitant sums to sit on its board will be front and center in the presidential campaign if Biden gets the Democrat nomination. As I've said before, the Biden-Burisma deal smells. It stinks to high heaven. And we're going to hear about it endlessly if Biden gets the Democrat nod. By the time the voters reach the polling place, the Biden name will be synonymous with corruption. Sure, the diehard anti-Trump voters will still vote for him, but some Democrats will switch, and some Democrats may stay home. Independent voters will go to President Trump in huge numbers, and Trump will win big. So what about Bernie Sanders? What about Elizabeth Warren? Bernie has some of the most loyal supporters of all, but there aren't enough of them. He'll get them, and in the general, he'll get a lot of diehard Trump-hating Democrats if he gets the nomination. But many Democrats that are turned off with how far the party has moved to the left will stay home, and some will vote Trump. And independents will vote for Trump in droves, and Trump will win big. Would it be any different with Warren? No. Unlike Bernie, she doesn't label herself as a socialist, but her policies make her one. More than that, when she acknowledged the numbers for her health care proposal, she scared the hell out of much of the country, and she's been falling ever since. Even though Bernie Sanders has had a heart attack, his chances to get the nomination now look better than hers. If Warren did get the nomination, independents would vote for Trump in droves, and Trump would win big. What about Pete Buttigieg, the soft-spoken mayor of Little South Bend, Indiana? You don't go straight from being the mayor of a city of 101,000 people to the president of a country of 327 million people. You don't go straight from being the mayor of a small city with a small police force to being the commander-in-chief of the most powerful military on the planet. You don't go straight from being the mayor of a small city with a small budget, with relatively little commercial activity, to being the president of a country with the largest economy in the world. He just isn't ready. There is no way that the American electorate is going to give him that big of a promotion. Frankly, that would be the biggest promotion since Charlie Bucket went from being a kid who bought a candy bar to running the Wonka chocolate empire in the movie Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. There's no golden ticket for Pete Buttigieg. It's just not going to happen. So who else? Well, it's a long shot, but it's possible in a brokered convention that Mayor Michael Bloomberg could get the Democrat nomination. Do I think he will? No, but he might. But here's the thing. Bernie Sanders has the most loyal supporters of any one of the major Democratic candidates, and he spends much of his time on the campaign trail deriding the billionaires of the country. He went virtually apoplectic when Bloomberg chose to enter the field late and then commit tens of millions of dollars to ad buys. Make no mistake about it. If by some chance Bloomberg were to get the nomination, especially in a brokered convention, most especially in a brokered convention where Bloomberg wasn't leading going into it, Bernie Sanders supporters will abandon the Democratic nominee en masse. They won't vote for Bloomberg. And others on the far left of the party will not be happy with the multi-billionaire, former Republican, arguably moderate Democrat at the top of the ticket. And Trump would win big. What else could happen? Well, I suppose in a brokered convention, Hillary could throw her hat into the ring. Good luck with that. I know there are a lot of people out there that dislike Donald Trump, but when you combine the number of people that despise Hillary Clinton for what she's done, what she's said, and the political entitlement mentality that huge numbers believe she represents, she brings it to a whole nother level. And Trump would win big. I'll be back next week with another episode of Political Spirits, and hopefully another big audience of listeners will join me. Be sure to tell your friends about Political Spirits and like the podcast on Facebook at Political Spirits. And follow me and the podcast on Twitter at Franklin Rye. And remember, all episodes are now on YouTube as well, and the YouTube channel is named Political Spirits Network. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. This is Franklin Rye. Thank you for listening.